Buongiorno and benvenuti a tutti. My name is Dennis Concordia, and I'm on the board of Festa Italia. Our celebrations over the years have been founded on the Italian culture, our faith, our music, and our art. And part of our art dedication is all around authors and books. And we've always had an author's night. And one of our most interesting authors in the last few years was a Hamiltonian by the name of Paul Benedetti, who is well known for his writings in the Hamilton Spectator. He finished it with a book called You Can Have a Dog When I'm Dead, which was well received by our community. It was an essay on life at an angle, as Paul calls it. So I'm very pleased to welcome Paul Benedetti to our 2020 Virtual Authors Night.
Thanks very much, Dennis. Nice to be here.
Paul, I just before we got into discussion of the book, I just wanted to talk about you and your attraction to journalism and see if we can maybe dig out some nuggets about your Italian background.
I was really interested in literature and books and reading, and our house was filled with books. And of course, as you know, Dennis, in most immigrant households, particularly Italian households, I would say, education is paramount. And if I heard it once, I heard it 100 times that we have to go to school and that school was the way forward. So I really loved reading, and that led me to study English literature at Mac along with history. And I ended up actually doing a graduate degree, a master's degree in English, and then graduated. And you can either start a little English shop or you have to rapidly figure out what you're going to do to make money with an English degree. And so I wanted to write, and the only way to write and make money is to enter journalism, really. So I began to try to work in that area, writing for magazines and eventually writing for the Hamilton Spectator. And I had a lot of help along the way. And oddly, there's an Italian connection here. My dad was friends with Florence Secoli, who you know, of course, was a writer and editor at the Spectator, very well respected. And so he asked if she would help me, meet me and talk to me. And her guidance led me into the Spectator newsroom. And after that, I was lucky enough to get some assignments. And eventually, after a year or so, once they knew they could trust my work and thought that I had something going on, I was invited to join the staff. So that's really my entree into the business. Even that has an Italian connection, oddly enough. And I had a lot of jobs in the newsroom. So people may not know that newsrooms are reporters are generalists, and then you have to take on everything. So I reported from Milton, Ontario. I reported from Burlington. I was eventually allowed into the main office at Hamilton, where I met you and many other great reporters and editors and fine people that work there. And I had a lot of jobs. I was for a while, the music writer, and not a very good one, I would say. I was the arts columnist, a job I enjoyed very much because I have an interest in art. I was a general assignment reporter, and eventually I became a feature writer and an investigative reporter. So I wore a lot of hats, that's for sure. And on the side, I always had my hand in doing a column. And so you may remember, Dennis, that I did a men's style column for almost 10 years.
So you did win a national, an Ontario newspaper award for humor. Do you remember, was that a specific column or was that just for a collection of your writing?
Yeah, you're allowed to submit 3 of your columns for that award. And I was lucky enough to win. I was nominated several times for that award, which I was also proud of. But yeah, I was lucky enough to win. So you would put together, say, your 3 best.
Right.
And it was, I felt good about that because it's hard to be funny.
And then you also went on to win a national newspaper award for best short feature. You remember which that was about?
Yeah, I do remember that. That's a very, it was a very special story to me and to my family. And that was a piece I did about my daughter learning Clair de Lune on the piano and practicing for months and months as a Christmas gift to her mom, my wife, Marnie Flaherty, because Marnie's mom played Clair de Lune on the piano. And I don't think you know this, but my wife's mother died when she was 16 years old.
No.
and she was in her early 40s, just a beautiful woman, and died of an aneurysm. So of course, there's always been a lot of emotion tied up in both that memory and about her. So I tried to describe in the column how my daughter just practiced so much to be able to play on Christmas Day this song for my wife. And I guess the judges at the National Newspaper Award liked it. So I was really pleased, not so much for me, although of course I was pleased for me, but I was really pleased that that story was given such a nice honor, and my wife was so happy about it as well.
And that's a nice segue then to your collection of columns that ended up in your book, You Can Have a Dog When I'm Dead.
You mean this collection, Dennis?
No, I meant this one.
Oh, yes. It's always good to have the book on hand.
So one of my favorites is the one where you talk about the sayings from your father.
Yes.
And there were some ones there that you talked about your father that I remember my father speaking to. Do you recall any of that and what some of the sayings were that you heard from your father, and as you're growing up you realized, you know, he was right a lot more than I thought?
Oh yeah, for sure. So I'm Italian on both sides of my family. My father came from Italy after the war, as many Italians did, in the second wave of immigration to Canada. And that was in about 48. He was in his 20s, so he was a young man by that point. And he comes from northern Italy, which I know is not the most popular origin spot in Hamilton, because we're so famous for our southern Italian friends, many of whom come from Raccomuto,
yes.
And so my father is a long way from Sicily. He comes from a town called Conegliano, Veneto. It's near Treviso, Veneto, and it's very well known, I think you may know it, for its Prosecco. So that is the birthplace of Prosecco, and it now has become quite a tourist spot because of its beauty, but also because of the wine. So he was always very proud of his heritage, and he spoke Trevisan, was his dialect, which is impossible to understand, but he also spoke very nice school Italian. And so when he spoke to us, he spoke in regular Italian so that we would pick up some of that. My mother's family, she was born in Hamilton's North End, James Street North by McNabb, and that's where she grew up, so a real North Ender. And her family is from Ascoli Piceno, a beautiful little town in the middle of Italy. Some people know it, some people don't. They're famous for their olives. And so she came from a different part of Italy, and they met in Hamilton, and that's how we came to be, our whole family. So I have Italian roots on both sides, different, as you know, Dennis, very different cultures within Italy. And so I'm just as proud of my Marquesan background. Le Marche is the province that my mom is from, but I'm also very proud of my Trevisan background as well. Very interesting differences and similarities, and both beautiful places, as most places in Italy are, of course.
Do you want to tell us now how some of your father's mannerisms affected your writing in this column here?
Yeah, sure. So my dad was a character. He was a very humorous guy, very intelligent and funny guy. And he wasn't a guy that would sit down and lecture us. And I don't know what your dad was like. I think a lot of fathers from the 50s and 60s were not guys who gave long speeches. But my father had a lot of ideas about things and a lot of wisdom that he would give us in short spurts. And we certainly knew where he stood in terms of ethics and values and how to live and conduct your life. So he had a lot of things that he said, but certainly one of the things he said was, never spend more than you make and you'll always feel like a rich man. He was very clear about things that could go wrong in your life and go right in your life. And he always said this, you can only spend so much on wine and women, but gambling is a bottomless pit. Nonetheless, he played poker and was pretty good at it, I might add, but he was pretty careful about that. And if he did go to the casino with my mom, he had a rule about leaving when he was ahead, a rule he stuck to. And then some of the things that he didn't really talk about as much, but he certainly gave us as real lessons in life, was the way he treated people. So I have to say that my dad, and you I think you remember him a little bit, was a community organizer. He helped many Italians in Hamilton settle. He helped them with their income tax. He helped them with their papers. He ended up becoming, as you know, an immigration appeal court judge. And all of that really was sourced from his community work. And so he treated people really well, and we learned that. I'll tell you this, and I remember this like it was yesterday. On Saturdays, he would take me or my brother or both of us down, and we would walk along James Street because he knew all the merchants, the shoe sellers and Rica Furniture, and of course Frank Amalfi at Bar Michelangelo, and all these guys that lived and worked down there. We couldn't get down that street without stopping to talk to somebody every 10 feet. I'm telling you, it took 4 hours to walk 2 blocks.
Uh-huh.
And he just knew everybody and everybody knew him. And I think that was great. He, in his earlier life, he worked as a real estate salesman. And one of the things that he always did when he finished a sale was drove back to the house of the people with a present for them to thank them for that he got the sale and to get them started on their life. It might be a toaster or some appliance that he bought for them. And I always said to Dad, why do you bother doing that? And he said, because that's how you treat people. When things go right for you, pass it forward, and life will bring that back around to you in some way. And I think that was true for him.
How about your mom? Anything you can tell us about your mom that you squeezed into one of your columns?
She read all of the books in my program, even if I didn't read them. So I took home all my books from my English lit classes. She read every novel that I was supposed to read when I was at McMaster. She was very well read, I have to say. But she was just a lovely, generous person. And I think what I really remember so much about my mom was that she was non-judgmental, and she had a huge heart. And so she just treated people with such kindness all the time. My wife mentioned this to me just recently. You know, mother-in-laws can be difficult. I suppose Italian mother-in-laws can be even more difficult. My wife actually said to me that my mother never spoke a harsh word to her in the entire time they knew each other, ever. So that's the kind of person she was. She was just a delight.
And we move on in the book, and you start telling a lot of stories about your son and your daughter.
You know, the values that we had in our house, which were about family and about being together and I think supporting one another, those are the values that we took forward into our life. My wife comes from a huge Irish Catholic family. She had 6 brothers and sisters. So you can imagine the chaos they had in that house. And they too believed in the same values of family. So yeah, I think the book, you know, tells a lot of stories about the good parts of having kids and the bumpy parts. You know, we had our eldest son had some medical issues and had to have several operations. That put a lot of strain and stress on the family. And I watched his brother and sister rally around him, which was sort of beautiful to see.
How about your daughter?
Well, she's a charmer. She's the last of the kids. So, you know, they always get special treatment. She's a lovely, lovely kid and lots of fun, a little more serious than the boys, which I think is typical. And I wish I could say that she was still a little kid, but she's all grown up and heading off to law school this September. So once again, we're going to lose her, which drives my wife crazy because she comes home and stays with us. My wife loves having her around. And then she heads off to make her own life. And that's a theme that came up, as you know, several times in the book,
right, where
it's difficult to let your kids go. And I tried to write about that a few times, sending kids off to university or sending kids on a trip to Europe. My wife calls it roots and wings. You give them roots so that they have wings to fly, right?
And the last person we want to talk about is your neighbor, Dave. So your neighbor, Dave, shows up many times in your book.
Yeah, so many people thought that Dave was fictional or somehow invented. And I was really surprised at that because the book, as you know, isn't invented. It's, I'm sure I exaggerate things occasionally for fun, but all the things that happen in the book really happened, of course. And my neighbor, Dave, really does live 2 doors down. He's also a very good friend of ours for many, many years, Dave Malcolm. And he is quite a character. He routinely would barge over into our house looking for something. He would come to borrow stuff. I would walk down there. We would often share a cocktail before dinner. And he emerged as a character so much that at every book signing, people would ask me about neighbor Dave. Finally, Dave started to come to the book signing and he would take a bow. And then here's the crazy part, Dennis. People would ask him to sign the book, not me.
So after your career, you retired from the Spectator, and you became a professor at Ryerson in
No, at
journalism.
the University of Western Ontario.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry. University of Western Ontario. I don't want to
Yeah.
get in trouble over that.
Yeah.
So you did that for maybe 10
A long
years?
time, 16 years.
And you've just retired from that.
Yes, I have, just recently.
And how about your years as a professor? How were the kids different than when you were a student?
Oh, that's a huge question. I absolutely loved teaching. I really enjoyed it. It was a lucky step for me. I think I was very fortuitous to be able to make that transition. And I can't tell you how much I enjoyed it. It was tremendous. I became the coordinator of the journalism program for I think 6 years and helped run that. I really enjoyed teaching in it all the time, both in the undergraduate section of the program, where we taught writing and critical thinking, and then in the graduate program for journalists, where I taught print journalism, long form writing, and basic news reporting. It was great. Listen, students have changed, there's no doubt about that, but I have to say that the students we had who were coming back into a graduate program were almost uniformly serious kids who really, they weren't kids, they were young adults, who really wanted to get the tools of a profession under their belt. I just feel so lucky that I had 16 years as a reporter. It's funny that it's equal, and 16 years teaching. So I got to use what I learned to help other people maybe join the profession. I hope some of them did. I know some of them did because I see their names in the newspaper. Several people at the Spectator are my former students.
Wow.
Which is really nice to see. And it's just a pleasure to watch people grow and blossom and get their own lives moving forward. It's terrific. If you have a little part in that, you feel pretty good about it.
Of course. And well done. It's a nice cap on your career.
Thank you.
I do want to thank you for spending the time with us today.
My pleasure, Dennis.
I think your good heart shows through your writing, and the story of your family does tie well back to the values that Canadian Italian descent people have, and we appreciate the time and the work that you've done over the years, and we look forward to keeping in touch and wish you and your family well. So thanks very much, Paul.
Well, thank you, Dennis. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, and thanks for asking me.
It was our pleasure.